What's happening, everybody? Happy Friday afternoon. Nothing like starting the show out with what I think you guys probably first heard was just the clunk of my phone hitting the table, but I dropped it right as I was trying to subtly read a text message as the camera was going live on screen because I am really good at this. I appreciate everybody jumping in, hanging out. I'm obliged to say that today's game plan show that was pushed back and is running concurrently with our NBA show is tangentially brought to you by Yahoo because they're sponsoring the NBA shows that you guys should be watching. This is going to be an MLB focused show. So we're going to take a look through the slate like we've talked about, and I'm going to just kind of go through some of these lineups and take a look at the actual lineups. I'm not really going to focus on pitching. I feel like we talked through pitching on the strategy show. Not much changes in terms of pitching, but sometimes things change for the actual lineups that get run out here. So we'll take a look through some of those now that we've got some confirmed lineups. And then we'll take a look at some actually crunch lineups and how these things come together in terms of our DFS abilities to set this thing up. Let me pop over here. So we'll just take a quick run through the slate from the top, really. And let me make sure I'm at the top here. So basically standard lineup for the Sox. It's almost exactly the lineup that we talked about this morning. No real changes through the top. We've got Marwin Gonzalez leading off is the main difference instead of Enrique Hernandez. Marwin is kind of a mess and has been for multiple years, but he's useful in that leadoff spot. You get him in multiple positions on both sides. He's not overly expensive. $2,400 is pretty cheap on FanDuel. It's a lot more about the Verdugo, Martinez, Bogarts, Devers, all these guys through the middle. And we talked about it on the show this morning, and it's something that I've emphasized on the previous game plan shows. So if you guys have caught those, this bottom part of this Red Sox order is really interesting for power. You can see these are Steamer projected strikeout rates for the season. Those aren't actuals, but I mean, these are guys who heavy strikeout guys, but just immense power as well. These are projected ISOs for the season right there. These are my home run marks and my home run model here. So you can see there's power throughout the Red Sox lineup, and they're going up against Matt Harvey, who we've talked about is kind of a mess. He had a nice little start against the Yanks where he was hitting 96 and pitching fairly well, but it's still Matt Harvey. He's kind of a clunky pitcher at this point. I think he's super targetable here. And these guys at the bottom of the order really interest me. I didn't update the ownership just before the show, but these were like the mid-afternoon update. They're not drawing a ton of ownership down there. I don't think they stack together all that well, but as like the last man in on a stack that includes these guys, I like getting to different rotations of these three, or maybe two of those guys, particularly on DK where you're rostering five guys. They don't work really well as traditional like wraparounds back to the top where they're going to be a speedy guy getting on base in front of these dudes. But what they do have the potential to do is clear the bases of these guys if those guys don't hit home runs, get on base, etc., etc. So these are mop-up guys down here for super cheap, super low ownership. If you're going to the Red Sox stack, do not ignore the bottom half of the lineup. I think they're definitely in play. Other side of this one, not a ton to love about the Orioles here. I prefer the Eduardo Rodriguez side of this one. As you can see, he doesn't rocket through the top of projections for me. I've got him right around where Alex does, 30. 8,700, I think that's a reasonable price for him. I'll have some shares of him on the FanDuel slate. I'll get to some of the Orioles. It just depends basically on what FC gives me back, but I don't expect they'll be one of my highest owned teams just given how the team projects through the middle here. I've got placeholders that go in for Mancini in the sorting process, for guys like Ramon Urias in the sorting process when they don't come up over here. But you can see, Mancini's got a nice little home run rate. Same thing with Austin Hayes, player that I really like. Michael Franco, Ryan Mountcastle. So there are bats to like, particularly through this part of the order. Cedric Mullins has been sneaky sharp all season long, so I wouldn't totally sleep on him. Nobody on this team, if you're going to it, all under 1% owned across the board, except for whatever reason, Mountcastle. I guess he's 2,600 on the DK slate. It's got some utility there, so he's getting one-offed over on the DK slate, it looks like. But nobody else really drawing any kind of ownership. So I don't hate that spot. Rodriguez is definitely a gettable pitcher, but he's been pitching really well so far this year, as you can see over here. 27.9% strikeout rate, 2.7% walks, under 3x FIP. Very nice start to the year for him. Jump over to the Nats. I forgot to check if... Okay, we don't have this one yet. Let me make sure it's not up. This is one of the lineups with a big question mark in it, right? If Juan Soto goes, this is a very different lineup and a very different look for Jameson Taillon. For right now, my model is coming up meh on Taillon. I think he improves if Soto comes out of here, but we'll see what happens there. If Soto plays, I like top end stacks of this Nats lineup with some of those lefties. Switch hitter Josh Bell. You get to Taillon on the right side of the plate. Anything can happen in Yankee Stadium, and this lineup's got enough frisky power to do it. Depends on how people are getting to it, though. I mean, if Soto's 21%, like we've got him here, 19% on DK, like, what are we really, really picking up there? Paying a regular price for him on FanDuel at their weird pricing, and then paying it's sort of cheap price, I guess, on DraftKings, $4,500. That's cheap. Juan Soto's a $5,000 player for sure, but we're getting him with ownership on him, and then with ownership on some of the more interesting bats in that stack. Taillon's a good pitcher when he's on. The talent is certainly there. 30% strikeout rate so far this year, but it's a very small sample, and he's a guy who hasn't pitched much, so he's gettable for sure, particularly in Yankee Stadium. Definitely like my Yankees on the other side of this one. I think you guys probably could see that coming. We do get Miguel Andujar in the lineup today, and it's actually interesting we get Miguel Andujar and Tyler Wade. Kind of thought it was going to be an either or between those guys when we were talking about it this morning, but both of them pretty interesting for the dead minimum on FanDuel, 2,600 and 2,200 Andujar then Wade on DK. You can get to those guys all day long at the bottom of the lineup, and they have multi-position eligibility. Andujar at third and outfield, Tyler Wade at second and short on both sites. Same positioning on both sites. I think that makes a ton of sense. Wade is a okay hit tool, maybe one of those like quad A type players, but respectable, like okay hit tool, decent speed, strikes out a bit too much, and hasn't really flashed it at the major league level. But you can see back over here, 2019, 108 plate appearances. He stole 7 bags, hit 2 home runs. He was only hitting 245 on base 33% of the time. Last season, 105 similar plate appearances, only 4 stolen bases, 3 home runs, on base 28% of the time. Still, there's upside there if he's able to turn the lineup over and get on in front of LeMahieu, Stanton, Judge, Glaber, all those guys at lower ownership. I'm just going to assume that this is lower ownership. I don't have it filled in. But I like those bats. I like Clint Frazier down here where you're probably getting them pretty sneaky. I still love Gary Sanchez. I'm happy that we're paying 24. Well, let me correct that. I'd rather be paying like $5,000 for him because then he'd be smoking the ball all over the place for the Yankees in real life. For DFS purposes, however, I am happy to get to his powerful bat for only $2,400. Still does make incredibly hard contact a lot of the time when he does happen to make contact. So there's a lot of gettable bats through the Yankees lineup here. I think they might be a little tiny bit underowned for the spot against Corbin. Corbin is a mess. We've seen it throughout the year. So I think it's a good spot for them going up against a lefty in Yankee Stadium. If you guys have questions, drop them in chat, by the way. Ken Simmons asks, who's my top FanDuel pitcher for cash? I think the ownership was mostly on Snell, so I would probably just look there. I don't really play cash in general across sports, and baseball cash seems like the most unappealing proposition in the world. But if you're doing it, this is... I don't think you guys can see this yet. Let me scroll over further. This is basically my starters board. So I get Rogers up top like Alex does. Ignore Gomber. I wouldn't advise anybody to go to Gomber. There's something wonky going on there. I got to figure out why he's projecting for so many strikeouts in my model. But that's basically my board. And some of it jives with Alex. I would say that for cash, Blake Snell is, with all that ownership on him, probably your safe route. I would be comfortable rostering Jack Flaherty there. I would be relatively comfortable rostering Zach Gallen there, despite the tougher matchup against the Mets. But that's probably better as a GPP play. So stick with just the safe guys, the known aces, and you're getting a discount on Snell. So I don't really see any reason to avoid that. Cheap Blake Snell with popularity. Don't mind it. I think you can go there. The other question was... I think the other question was, where can you get these stats? That answer is the internet. You can get these stats. I'm pulling stats in this model from all over God's creation. That includes Baseball Reference. That includes heavy use of Fangraphs, who, if you guys have, after subscribing at Awesemo and doing your thing with all the different DFS dollars, if you guys have a few bucks to throw around from winning some of these tournaments, throw them at Fangraphs, because they run on donations and they're user-based and all of that, and we pull so much data from them. The entire industry does, really, and they do just tremendous work over there. It's a great site. There's stuff in here from, Razzball. I think I've got stuff in here from just ESPN's split page on some of these tabs. There are an absurd amount of tabs if I click over in the bottom of this, some of which have lost all functionality. some of which have not been updated in forever, some of which I don't even remember what they do. When people ask how my model works, a lot of the time my answer is I don't really remember with some of it because I built it years ago and it just kind of works. So there hasn't been a need to like go back and fix the plumbing. There's been reason to go back and fix leaky pipes from time to time. Like I said, some of those tabs, the sites just went away, so I've had to go back and find new sources and rebuild things. I had to do some cosmetic surgery based on what Fangraphs changed this year, for example, with the way that they abbreviate teams. Yeah, the question that I was answering there was where do we get stats? And the answer was the internet. There are many, many great sites for stats. We don't have this content on our site, though. This is my own personal little Excel stat board, and this is what I'm looking at when we're talking shows. This is my model. The dashboard here was entirely, this view of everything was ripped off from Josh. So again, thanks to him. I've said that a bunch of times, but he deserves the credit for the pretty view that you guys are seeing here. Anyway, Trevor Rogers, you guys saw, was the top pitcher on my board, top pitcher on Alex's board. Projects tremendously. I think it's a great, great spot for him. And pitching breaks down interestingly. We'll talk about that when I jump over to Cruncher in a second and we start crunching some lineups, because I think it's an interesting proposition for tournament play between Snell and Rogers and a couple of these other guys at the top of the board, considering how they project for Alex, considering how frequently they're coming up as the top pitcher. It looks like we could argue that Snell is over-owned where the other guys might be slightly over-leveraged but not necessarily over-owned for their positioning. And Rogers would be that specific guy that I'm thinking of there. 8,800, just absolute no-brainer smash spot on the DK slate. I think that's a great, great spot. If he doesn't come through, he doesn't come through, but it's one of the better spots on the board. He is just pitching great lights-out strikeouts, 33.8% this year, 30% last year, and the Brewers are a heavy strikeout matchup for him. We can see if I can click over to it quick enough. Wrong one. Wrong one. There it is. Brewers against lefties. Come on. Sort of the smallest because I'm not smart. Brewers against lefties. Going to be down here. Yeah, fifth from the bottom, 29.2% strikeout rate this year. That's brutal, almost 30% of the time. They are doing well in terms of hitting for power. They've hit for a 186 ISO. They've created runs 22% better than average. So there's a little bit of trouble there maybe. But in terms of the strikeout upside, that's a great, great spot for Rogers. Let me take the time to click back over to this one. There we go. But we were talking lineups. I'm not sure how much of that Brewers lineup I'll throw up against Rogers. If I'm rostering him really, really heavily, then yeah, I'll probably roll just a couple hedge stacks. There are some bats, particularly like Avi Garcia against lefties you can get to. Lorenzo Cain, like that's the thing though. There's not many bats, right? And I don't love starting off with Colton Wong. I know he's been hot, but like lefty Colton Wong off the top. He's cheap, but meh. There's not much that I love about that. So if I was to do it, maybe I'm one-offing or maybe I'm grabbing like a 2 or 3 man stack here with two of those righties, Lorenzo Cain and Avi Garcia primarily. But I do not love this lineup coming back the other way. Similar story for the Marlins going up against Suter and a cast of thousands out of the Brewers bullpen here. Brewers have a decent pen with some of those high leverage arms, but once you get into the long men, it depends on who rolls out of there. The Marlins could be frisky here, but there's just not a lot to really go out of our way for in the confirmed lineup. I like Adam Duvall, like I said this morning, against pretty much anybody, but just looking down the lineup, this is not the strongest possible Marlins lineup in the world. Miguel Rojas, Jesus Aguilar, Garrett Cooper up top. Then after Duvall, we get Isan Diaz, John Birdie, Sandy Leone, and Magneuris Sierra, one of my favorite names in the league. So, yeah, not a lot there. They're super cheap. If you need a super cheap stack for whatever reason that is unlikely to come through or do very much of anything, these are your guys. I just don't really see why you would really need to go here, even though it's not the toughest spot in the world matchups-wise. Diamondbacks. I mentioned this morning they're hitting for frisky power against... it's not worth clicking over to the thing again, but let me just read it off to you guys. Suffice to say I'm reading the right numbers from the board once I get this thing sorted. The Diamondbacks have been really frisky this year against lefty pitching, and David Peterson for the Mets is a lefty. He's pretty good. I like the upside of the kid. He's like 3-4 starter good, not ace level good, but decent. So the Diamondbacks this year, though, it's small sample, but 255 ISO so far against lefty pitching, only striking out 20.3% of the time. 131 is 31% better than average, creating runs against lefty pitching. Only 14 home runs, but they're just getting a lot done in terms of driving the ball. It's not a lineup that I really like. I struggle to get to stacks that really look good to me when I put this team together, but it gives me a little bit more hesitation than I would expect to have for David Peterson in this spot. What I do like is the price, and I like the ownership. I think there's upside in getting to him, so I will. And I like Zach Gallen on the other side. So I'm not sure how much these lineups are going to come up for me. You can see the Mets not really projecting through the roof. They normally project a little bit more dark green through some of these guys, the Dom Smiths of the world. So they've come down a little bit, but they're not getting a ton of ownership as of my last update. I think that's still true. We can take a look at the top stacks tool. Diamondbacks on the other side of this one, similar story. Not a lot of people going to them. Very, very cheap through here, but just not really like rocketing through the top of projections. So I just don't know how much I'll get to them. On the DK side, I think there's some bonkers prices in there. $5,000 for Carson Kelly, $5,300 for Eduardo Escobar. That's a little tough to justify. I guess you could say the same about $3,500 Carson Kelly on FanDuel, but that just feels different. $5,000 just, it feels like a much higher price. But he's not getting much ownership, hitting second as a catcher on DK. I can argue that it's worth paying for in that spot, particularly if you're going to their stacks. That's the part where I usually wait for somebody else to talk, but I'm flying solo. Whoops, missed. Went to the Reds game instead. I guess we don't need to talk about like every single game in this much depth, huh? Because otherwise we'll be here till after the slate locks. I think it's bonkers that Byron Buxton costs $4,500. He costs more than Mike Trout all week long. He's been earning it, though. I like this Twins lineup a lot when we get them against a lefty. I think Tarik Skubal's got talent, but the numbers aren't there, not really supporting going to him in any way, shape, or form. I think you can get to the Twins lineup against him, particularly if you get like a Kyle Garlick here in the middle of the lineup at 2,000, dead minimum on FanDuel. Even if he's down this way, that's totally fine. Kepler lefty, I never really love getting to, but I think it's okay if he's in the lineup just as a curveball to construction. Miguel Sano I wouldn't sleep on from late in the lineup. Even Andrelton Simmons, if he's in there, is somewhat interesting as a frisky bat. More of a hit tool kind of a guy, but definitely frisky and very, very strong ability to limit strikeouts. So he's a very good option to potentially turn the lineup over, which makes him a good option for wraparound stacks at a sneaky shortstop position. So I don't hate Andrelton Simmons if he's in the bottom of the lineup here like he is in the projected. On the Tigers side of things, I mean, it's Matt Shoemaker, so I guess. I'm getting decent home run marks, as you can see in the middle over here, on him. Against him, rather, on the Tigers. It's just, I don't love this Tigers team. I know they've produced a little bit so far this season, but it's just not a spot for me. I would take what I get of them in crunches, but I suspect most of it would get filtered out through sorting. They don't really come through in massive projections here. So a little bit of one-off possibility maybe if you get to some of this home run power like a Johnny Scope or for the dead minimum at second base. I can get to that as a home run one-off on FanDuel. That kind of makes sense. Is that price actually right? I didn't even realize that. That kind of stands out now that I'm thinking about it. Are these right? Is Miguel Cabrera the dead minimum on FanDuel? I gotta cross-reference that. Hold on. Wow. How far the mighty have fallen. Yesterday, Albert Pujols gets cut in real life. Today, Miguel Cabrera costs the dead minimum on FanDuel. That's interesting. I hadn't really realized the pricing, I guess, fully, just looking at it. But those guys are interesting in this spot then. I don't totally hate that, particularly as one-offs. Something to file away. All right, moving on. Well, we did that one. Bad at this. The Reds are bats I've been liking to get to all season. We talked about it. Nick Senzel, I wouldn't sleep on up at the top of the lineup there. Nice little addition, hitting in front of Jesse Winker. I think that's very interesting. He should see some decent pitches leading off. Very high-end kid coming into the league. Hasn't really put it together at the major league level, but that's why he's cheap. I like getting to him leading off there. Love everything about Winker, Castellanos, Moustakas, Suarez, even getting down to Naquin there. You can roster Tucker Barnhart as a catcher on DK for sure at 3,600. Don't love the Shogo Akiyama end piece there. He's got a little bit of speed, but the hit tool hasn't really come through in the majors. Kyle Farmer, don't really need to get to him. There's salary savings there. There's ownership savings there. If you're stacking Reds, you can do it, but I don't think you need to at this ownership. I can definitely throw some bats at Zach Plesac, though. I think we talked about it on the show this morning. You can check that out. But the strikeouts are back down this year. I think he's targetable here. I think the same thing about Wade Miley the other direction. He limits runs, typically. He doesn't give up a ton. He doesn't do a lot in terms of striking a ton of guys out. Not really a DFS viable guy, but somebody who could potentially cap these Indians. But I do like going to the Indians when they're under-owned. The thing is, you're getting a bat like Luplow here at 25. It looks like people might be getting to him a little bit as a one-off. So it just would depend on how this comes together. But like if Franmil's going off really low owned against the lefty, that's a pretty appealing spot against anybody. So I would keep that in mind as a one-off. We're in stacks. Hit the accelerator a little bit on some of these as we're going through. Phillies are popping up now. Nailed the Andrew McCutchen double dog. Did anybody benefit out there from that the other day? He wasn't my home run pick, but he was the home run pick for the Phillies in that double dog day. I was happy about that one. Like seeing the veteran guys come through. Let me see what else is going on here in the chat. Jordan Cush, I decided to play a couple single entries today, so I'm struggling picking my stack. Can you highlight your favorite stacks to go to on DK for low entry single entries? We can talk about that. I'll open up the stacks tool for the DK slate when we jump over to Cruncher in just a couple of minutes after we talk through the teams here. We'll take a look at just how the stacks rank out real quick since we're behind the paywall. I can show that. Let me just talk through a couple more of these spots here. The Braves, I'll throw the Braves against any right-handed pitching. I really like that lineup. They are productive like crazy. It was more fun when Adam Duvall was in there as well last year, but there's just a lot of bats. Even 1 through 8, even Christian Pache the other day, I liked him, and he came through with his first career home run. Didn't call that one, but I was talking about him that day, so I'll take credit, pat myself on the back again. But I do like getting to that Braves lineup, particularly when the bottom end of the lineup, like, yeah, these two guys, Freeman and Acuna, everybody knows that they're going to them, even though they're pricey. But this lineup immediately becomes lower owned. So you can get to this lineup in different combinations. It becomes fairly easy to stack them. The Phillies on the other side, I will take some shots at Charlie Morton. I still don't know what to make of it. He's there. The strikeouts are there. I just don't fully trust him anymore in terms of rostering him as a pitcher, but I don't know that he's somebody that I want to attack with bats by any means. Effective, 3.44 xFIP, putting a few more guys on base than you'd like to see. It was higher last year, which was causing some of his problems. Strikeouts are back up at 27.5%. The walks are back up. I don't know. I don't love getting to Charlie Morton. I don't love throwing bats against him. But with Bryce Harper back in the lineup, this Phillies lineup is fairly dynamic. So I don't hate it either. And based on how they project there, I'll probably get to some of it when we start crunching. I talked about the Mariners this morning. I think they're in a really interesting spot. Ignore this. This needs to be cut in half because those are not the actual home run totals. It needs to be halved based on Mike Foltynewicz's ridiculous small sample. So I did that when I published the home run numbers. The ones that we used for the power index are half of these because these are not real. They don't actually relate to anything else in how the model works. But as you can see, Titanic upside for those Mariners in this spot. Some people getting to Kyle Seager, some people getting to Mitch Haniger, but Ty France getting totally ignored. Kyle Lewis getting ignored enough. Even Evan White, I talked about it in my article today. Evan White had a couple nice years in the minors in terms of his hit tool. He's not the total swing and miss all or nothing type guy that he's been so far at the major league level. So I think that's interesting. Throwing Rangers bats at Chris Flexen. We talked about it on the show. There's lefty power in this lineup. I don't love this Rangers lineup. Gunn was a little bit more enthusiastic about it on the strategy show. I actually missed what the guys on the deep dive said about it, but I'd be curious. I might go back and catch what Alex had to think about him. It's just not a team I tend to get right. I hate getting to heavy strikeout lineups like that as my stack, but they do have that power, that pop. As you can see, Joey Gallo always projects well for a home run for me. The Blue Jays are a lineup that I do like to get to. Love this lineup most nights 1 through 9. Different interesting pieces. They usually project pretty well. They're usually fairly priced, if not too cheap. They usually have decent home run upside here. I think that's going to be pretty much the story here against Jose Urquidy. Similar story on the other side of things. You can see much better home run marks. Love getting to some Astros when they're under-owned, but that's not the case. They're getting a lot of popularity here. The back end of the lineup's interesting, though. Without a lot of popularity and without a heavy price tag, I can get to some Carlos Correa late, some Yuli Gurriel, some Kyle Tucker down there. I don't love Miles Straw or Martin Maldonado at the end of it, but definitely these two, at least, can help offset some of this, or these three rather, can help offset some of this heavier ownership that you're seeing over there. So it's a good spot for the Astros, just a little tougher to roster them. Rockies probably going to get carved up here. I think the spot for Jack Flaherty is pretty nice. We talk about the Rockies against righties struggling. We talk about the Rockies on the road always struggling over the last couple of years. So really good spot for Jack Flash. Don't really need to get to any Rockies. If you want to take shots as one-offs, that's fine. If you want to stack them, that's on you. I would include Trevor Story and CJ Cron and Charlie Blackmon in those stacks, and probably Ryan McMahon as well, and there you go. On the other side, we talked again on the strategy show more about the top end of this lineup. I'm probably a little bit more willing than Gunn was to get down into the dregs of the lineup. I'm thinking the Paul DeYoungs, Tyler O'Neills, Harrison Baders of the world. I do like the power upside on those guys, although Austin Gomber on the other side has been good capping opposing power through his career, keeping the ball in the yard, keeping the ball on the ground, which is what's suppressing the home run model here. So this might be a little bit low for what Gomber's been this year. It's not catching all of this year yet, so we'll see. But it is taking the power upside away from the Cards a little bit, and people getting to them a little. So I'm curious about that spot. One I might not totally be on. Dodgers going up against Griff Canning and the Angels on the other side of things. We talked about Canning as a potential value option. He's not projecting like it for me, but I think it's an interesting enough spot where I just want to see how it comes out in the wash, what lineups come together with it, if you can spend your salary in interesting and correct ways getting to him. It's a terrible spot going up against this Dodgers lineup. So I don't love that. Don't love Urias coming back the other way. I think I can get the bats on both sides of this one. Dodgers, as you can see, project out pretty well, better than average home run marks. It's the Dodgers. I don't really have to sell you. At some point, I will actually update this so that I don't get Will Smith, the pitcher, in here. Usually I just go into the salary page and change it to like William Smith on the pitcher so that gets corrected. But one day I will actually fix that. On the other side, the Angels look under-owned for the spot against Urias. Urias, definitely a very good pitcher when he's on, but I think he's gettable at times when he's not on. And if there's nobody on this lineup that includes Mike Trout, that includes a hitter I really like in Shohei Ohtani, that includes a great hit tool on base kind of a guy in David Fletcher up top, some sneaky power in Jared Walsh, and then Justin Upton is also in the lineup and some of these other guys. I don't love the way it's put together in the projected here. But depending on what comes out, it's obviously better when Rendon's healthy and in the lineup. But I could maybe get to some sneaky shares of that stack late. We didn't hit the White Sox game because when I did the odds, it was the last one on the board, so it's actually last on this list because that's the order that these go in. Rays, lefties on this one. I will take what I get of this game, but really nothing pops in this Rays-A's game on either side. I'll maybe get to some shares of Sean Manaea, but he's owned around like where I wanted to. When I saw him, I said like, maybe I'll put him like 8%, and that's around where we've got him. So if anything, I'll maybe be with the public there, but I think it probably makes sense if he's going to come in around there. I'd probably just rather be off the play and get onto something else on a slate this big, but we'll see. See how it comes out. Rich Hill, they're projecting very similar, 31.95, 31.41. I think it's kind of similar there. I don't know that I need to get to Rich Hill against the A's lineup that has some power in it, doesn't project great, pitchers park, but I'm not totally excited about that. But it does, the projection's there, so it's kind of interesting. I don't know. We'll see. That's a we'll see one. Blake Snell, I mentioned off the top, he's definitely cheap at $9,000 on FanDuel, getting a ton of ownership for the price. Supreme upside going up against the Giants lineup that does limit strikeouts, that is pretty good in terms of things like that, but doesn't have a ton of power, doesn't have an immense upside, so he could put up a very nice start for the money, but there's going to be a ton of people on it. So you're rolling the dice kind of, all right, if Blake Snell does come through, now I'm just with the field and I've still got to bullseye the right bats, and I'm down a specific lane of lineups that I can get to. He doesn't cost through the roof money, but $9,000 is healthy enough of a salary that it's going to put you onto some pretty similar and popular lineup constructions as you do that. DeSclafani, super interested to see what he does against this lineup. I'm not going to be rostering him while he does it though. I can get to probably some Padres coming back against DeSclafani, and maybe if I'm feeling like it, throwing some Giants bats. Not many shares, but I don't think it needs to be very many just against the popularity of Snell. That's if I undercut the field on the Snell number. I would probably do that. just to kind of back the play up a little bit. The White Sox game was another one. Keller is suppressing the home run marks for me for the White Sox, which is pulling their projections down because Brad Keller through his career has been excellent, keeping the ball on the ground, inducing soft contact, all these things, keeping the ball in the ballpark. This year he's given up 4 home runs. All of last year he gave up 2 home runs. So he struggled a little bit out of the gate. He does not project well in terms of strikeouts, does not project well in terms of fantasy points. But for me, he does typically take the cap off the power on the other side. So it's interesting. The White Sox do project out well, though, for Alex in terms of the top stacks tool. So I'm very curious to see which one of us is right about that. He's been right more about Keller so far this year than I was, but I was right about him more last year when he was actually on and pitching like himself. We'll see which Brad Keller we get. I do not recommend going to Brad Keller, but it only costs $4,900 on DraftKings. That's kind of interesting. He's super, super unlikely to put up a good start in terms of any kind of strikeouts or anything. But at that price, at like a hitter price, he could give you a handful of DK points and might have enough utility to get you something else. That's all I'll say. I am not recommending you roster Brad Keller. All right. I think that covers all the games. Let's hop over to the old fantasy cruncher here. Seattle lineups have been confirmed. The one everybody was waiting for. Let's just see if there's anything wacky in it while that reloads. Come on. Nope. The other site didn't load it up yet, so I don't know. I'll find out when we find out. Buxton now on the IL according to FanDuel. I didn't see that. Is that accurate? Oh, yeah. Looks like he came off the top of the projected lineup. So we've got that Twins projected is now. Thanks for that, whoever said it in the chat there. I didn't catch that. But Twins lineup is now Kepler, Donaldson, Cruz, Garlick, Garver, Polanco, Cave, Sano, Simmons. That's projected still, though, not confirmed. But yeah, if they lose Buxton off the top, he was banged up, so that can make sense if they put him on the IL. Takes a little bit off the top of that lineup, but it's still a lineup I like getting to. And if it makes it less popular, the spot is still pretty decent against Tarek Skubal. So, interesting. Good call there, though. Appreciate it. And, of course, we came all the way out of Fantasy Cruncher. Adam on the NBA show there. Talking all sorts of things NBA. Probably talking about Terry Rozier, who's going to be crazy popular tonight. I don't know. I wrote about the basketball slate. It's on the site. You can check it out. I suggest if you're looking for basketball tips, jumping into the show, though. The basketball show, and tangentially this show, as I said before, is brought to you by Yahoo. They have nothing to do with this show, and probably don't even know that it's going on. But since I'm running it at the same time as the basketball show, I don't want to draw eyeballs away from a sponsor without at least mentioning them. Let's see if my Top Shot... Nope. Only 91,095 people left in front of me in line for the Top Shot pack. Fantasy Cruncher is just taking its sweet time loading up here. Luckily, I loaded up my projections and everything earlier. I actually planned ahead this time. So if we can just get these Tecmo Bowl guys off the screen here and get some actual lineups in, we can start crunching. Oh, what we can do, though, while that's happening, is take a look. I promised. This is the top pitchers, of course. So I'll give it more to do by trying to open the top stacks. Just as I was bragging about having thought ahead, turns out I thought ahead about most of the wrong things. Here we go. DraftKings. Somebody asked about top stacks on DraftKings before. In the event that they're still around, we can talk about that real quick. As soon as it loads. Like, why is it the stupid part that, like, everything, the entire rest of the screen was easier to load than this little grid here? I don't believe that. Anyway. All right, this is Alex's top stacks board that you guys should all be familiar with. If you guys aren't using this, you're doing baseball DFS wrong, particularly if you have access to this, you're paying for it. It would be ridiculous not to be using this. It's one of the best tools in the industry. All right, sorry, lecture over. I don't know where that came from. So, looking at the board here, top stack, the Dodgers against Griff Canning, like we talked about. The leverage there is super interesting. The value score is obviously not. They're going to be really difficult to roster, but we don't exactly have crazy pitchers that, like, if you decide to forego Blake Snell and not pay through the nose for him, and then maybe, come down the board a little bit on a day that's made up of down the board pitchers, I think you could probably get to a 5-man Dodgers without too much difficulty, without sacrificing too much pitching upside. And then, maybe you go to a 2-man and a 1-off, and do like a 5-2-1 with two of the decent pitchers, not the top end pitchers, and do a premium Dodger stack there. It's just this is outrageous leverage for, not by far the top stack, but by a full percentage point the top stack there. Curious to see how Minnesota comes down the board now. If this, assuming this doesn't have the Buxton news baked into it, if it does, they still rank out pretty well. The leverage is there. The leverage is positive, but it's not as positive as those Dodgers. But there's more value there based on the Kyle Garlicks of the world being incredibly cheap. The White Sox, like I mentioned, I get them differently than Alex does based on the profile for Keller. But assuming that he's the Keller that we've seen this year, I do agree with basically where Alex has them, and that would be interesting. Not a lot of public going to them either. So getting all three teams on the top of the DraftKings board at positive leverage is kind of interesting, not all that common. The board is relatively flat, like you're not seeing, especially between third down, like 6.9 to 6.6 to 6.0, we're talking about less than a percentage point between them, Boston and Houston. But getting them at this much of a leverage advantage over those highly owned teams is really, really interesting. So, and it's not like, especially if we're considering Minnesota still in that spot, it's not like they don't compare favorably for value there as well. My Mariners, who I mentioned before, they've slipped into a little bit of negative leverage on DK as well. I suspect they're more negatively leveraged on FanDuel now, but I still like that spot given the way that the power profile is against Fulte. And then that's kind of how I look at it for whoever asked, is I just kind of go down here. I compare, once we get down into these areas, I compare, all right, how does this 2.9 compare to like the third team, the fourth team? This is still not a crazy delta, 4 percentage points, but it's 3% probability versus 6 or 7. You're talking about a difference there. But if you get a team that's very highly positively leveraged down here, maybe it's a go-to team or an extremely high value. Not that the Cincinnati one that I've highlighted twice now is either of those things, and none of them really are. But that's kind of how I look at that. That's how I find those teams. That's kind of how we all do it. Meanwhile, this is not loaded. It'd be cool if my neck actually cracked in a movie when I had done that, but no dice with the sound effects. I'm gonna hit reload and see if this thing pops up. This is again not Fantasy Cruncher's fault. It just doesn't like working when I run it with the OBS suite for my production here. I wanted to crunch lineups for you guys. I really did. We've got some time. If it loads up, I don't really care. We can go into overtime. Hey, there we go. Look who's off my board entirely. Mr. Matt Harvey, taken out of the pool. I don't know why it loaded and then went right back to the players. Probably because I hit the reload button, right? We will just sit here and watch for a minute and see if we can figure this out. Nothing really to figure out. It's just a matter of waiting it out. Yeah, come on. I know. It's thrilling air. Everybody loves watching this. Do we have any questions in the chat? Anybody asking anything interesting? Who's wondering anything? Gene B. Kim wants to know, why should he get FC Pro? Gene, you do pretty well without it. I don't know if I would change a thing. That's my answer. I don't actually use Pro. I use the standard version. Pro comes with the access to lineup study, which is probably the best thing. If I played on DK, I would probably pay for Pro just so I could access lineup study. It comes with the bell curve randomness, and it comes with the auto groups creator. Where auto groups creator comes in the most handy for me is in football, where you're creating all those different groups. And that article that I was writing every week, I should say, for football took me literally the full night the night before. I would crunch out like 50,000 lineups and do just the different combinations of the groups and everything. The auto groups creator at least helps you set it up really quickly, but I still think it needs refinement. But those are really the main features of going to Pro. And that's the Pro that's on our site. It's different. Fantasy Cruncher, if you go to their site, has Fantasy Cruncher Lite now, and they call this version of Fantasy Cruncher that we host here Fantasy Cruncher Pro. I think it does include those features, but their Lite version only lets you crunch 20 lineups at a time, where our version and their Pro version lets you crunch the 500 lineups, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It gets really, really fun to answer these questions via the customer support inbox, let me tell you. As you can see, this also does not want to let us do anything with it. I don't know why it's being finicky. We could jump over to the lineup builder tool, I guess. Oh, wait. Do we have anything? Signs of life. It's sorted again. I haven't actually clicked on anything, but it decided to sort, which I guess is good. Give me some sort of functionality. Nope. It's just like mouse smashing frustration. You guys ever just smash the hell out of a mouse like at work or anything like that? I haven't, but it just seems so tempting sometimes. Particularly, these things just get flimsier and flimsier. Like, you could just crush this in your hand pretty easily. They should make the like combination mouse / stress ball. They probably do. Hey, we got functionality. Look at that. See? Why can I scroll but I can't? All right. We're going to really press our luck here. Come on. Oh, I didn't think that would jam us up. I wouldn't have done it. All right, we're good. You know what? Forget it. I'm not going to sort. I'm just going to run a crunch. Let's just start looking at some of these lineups. We got like 15 minutes. Let it run a couple of these, and we will see what happens. I forgot I had stacks built in here before, and since the lineup's updated, I got to update them. This is a fun new little feature in Fantasy Cruncher. Every time the thing updates, and at least it actually moved along there for us, every time the thing updates, we've got to delete these and rebuild them now for reasons. Don't know what those reasons are. I love Fantasy Cruncher. They're fun sometimes. But for the upside, for what they give us, this is what I tell people when they complain. I mean, there's so much in this product that for the upside, I'm willing to tolerate a little bit of bugs, a little bit of wonkiness, a little bit of, oh, this would be better if kind of situations. I think everybody out there probably agrees. And again, the slowness is not on them. That's on me. If we've talked about these settings before, but for anybody who hasn't watched me struggle through the slowness of this thing, I like to do 2 players on a 4-man. I cut it down to 1 usually on a 3-man. Sometimes I'll run the 3s with 2. If I get down to like a 2-man, then definitely want to do a 1 gap at most. And usually I like to put those guys just back to back, put them right together. Would help if that didn't pop up for every single request now. All right. We've got our exposure set. We've got our random miss. We've got most of the lineups in the right orders and all of that stuff done already. If this window would just close now, thank you. We can click calculate and hopefully get some lineups to talk about. I let Snell kind of fly at higher ownership exposure than I think I might run with. I might just put a cap on him that's undercutting the field a little bit because he was coming out. I think I had it at 35, which is around the field. And he was coming up around that in the actual crunch that I ran before, which kind of wish I still had because we could just look at it, which is how I'll do this next time. But I think when I actually run the full crunch for what I enter, I'm going to probably set it to come in under that because I think I'd rather get to some of the lower aggregate ownership on guys at the top of the board like Trevor Rogers, who you see there in the first lineup that we get here. That lineup's a little bit frisky, huh? I kind of like that. The Mariners, who I love, that I talked about, the top pitcher on my board, and then the Nats lineup that I kind of talked about with the right pieces of that lineup just dropping immediately into that first lineup off the board there. So that's kind of, I kind of don't hate that. Nice solid projection on it. We are running this with randomness, so it's not just pulling the top end lineup off the board, but that's kind of a fun one out of the gate there. Getting to Josh Bell, Trey Turner, Kyle Schwarber, Juan Soto, the heart of that order, and the lefty / switch hitting power that we want to get to there. And then some of the right bats. Actually, those are the right bats that I wanted to get to from Seattle anyway. France and Haniger, I mentioned, are very popular, Seager and Haniger, but France wasn't getting any ownership. Hitting cleanup there I like, and then J.P. Crawford bumping up into the 5 spot there I like as well. Sneaky upside, we've seen him put up slate-breaking scores before, very, very infrequently, but he does have that upside. Decent pedigree as a kid coming up. Looking at some of these other ones, so leaving some salary on the board with these two, but this is a stack that, like, this is, again, a playable lineup. The issue with it is you're getting Kyle Garlick pulled into this. He's leading off in the confirmed Twins lineup, it looks like, which is going to be a pain in the ass because that's going to pull him into a ton of stacks as you're getting Minnesota there, but it's going to build a ton of lineups that are leaving a lot of money on the table like that, which is fine for baseball purposes, but it might not necessarily be maximizing how to spend that. And if we get Garlick going off at like 30% now in terms of the public ownership, that becomes a less appealing spot and something less appealing to build into stacks. So it might be worth considering putting an artificial cap on his ownership, depending on where he comes down in the public ownership in the last hour as we head into lock here. But this isn't a lineup that I dislike in terms of who's in it. I like the Twins. I like the spot for both of those teams. I talked about both of those teams, and you're capturing a very chalky but very high-end, very upside-heavy Blake Snell there. So probably just underpriced Blake Snell combined with a $2,000 leadoff hitter is causing this lineup to go undervalued in terms of the price tag on it. Snell in a lineup that I probably don't like as much as that other one here because of getting to the Rangers and leaving Joey Gallo on the bench. Don't love that. I like the Red Sox that we're getting to here, the 3, 4, 5, 7 in the Red Sox with Renfroe in there. That's exactly the way I talked about building that lineup, or building that stack rather, with these bats from the middle, the extreme upside, the obvious names, and then grabbing one of those 3 hitters from the bottom that I talked about with all that power. So if these guys are on and Hunter Renfroe cleans up the whole thing, that's exactly how you want to hit that stack hard. It just depends, again, on the ownership, though, whether it's Renfroe, Cordero, or Bobby Dahlbeck down at the bottom, how you can put the lineup together, where the ownership actually falls on those guys in terms of which one you want. But all of them have that kind of upside. That one in the middle is kind of interesting there with Jack Flash up top. I don't love the Orioles stack today, though, and I don't love game stacking. And it's not that game stacks can't go off in baseball. There's just no real drive. There's no correlation where, like, if you expect an upside team in football, in basketball, one's going to kind of have to carry the other. Otherwise, you get into the blowout and the whole, not trying anymore, et cetera, part of the thing. So, so that's why I don't love the idea of game stacking in baseball. It can go off, but it's just 2 unique events have to go together instead of one that carries the other. But that said, that's not the worst way in the world to spend your money. Don't love you, Ramon Urias there for $2,000 though. Right, Yanks one is kind of interesting. If I was going to roll this one, I might, because I like the way those bats come together, I might look at that pitcher spot. I like Peterson here, but I think we could maybe spend, since it's not spending all the money, we could maybe spend, let me see if it'll let me. We can maybe spend this money a little bit better. So this is like if I'm curating lineups, if I'm entering like a 20 max, particularly if I'm going to enter a single entry, where you can sit here and really get your hands on and curate these things. I like to run a crunch and then just kind of get into the lineups and see what else I can do. Like Gallen on the other side of that one was projecting better, but I don't love that as a direct pivot necessarily. Eduardo Rodriguez. That could be the move as soon as this thing sorts by salary. I don't know why it doesn't just sort by out of the default there. Rodriguez was probably the upside play there. Jump to the 8,700 salary. I think that's probably a better spot. Get to him against, even though I project Peterson out a little bit better. I would let my projections roll with this, but for the show purposes, for what I'm recommending and what we can talk about here, that's probably a better lineup. I think Alex has Eduardo Rodriguez out ahead of David Peterson on the top starters tool. Cross-reference it, check me, make sure I'm right. Roll both lineups if you're feeling frisky. But I really like the way that this one comes together in terms of the upside of those bats. Just look at that. I mean, that's gorgeous. So maybe going to hang on to that one. Little subtle unclick there so that I can delete all the rest of those and hang on to that one if I want to. See what else is going on down here. Some Twins and Yanks with Jack Flaherty. Whew, that's a nice one. That's a nice one, and it doesn't use the Kyle Garlick shortcut. Right? That's interesting. Getting to Jack Flaherty, a pitcher that I really like. Passion come through. Thanks, J187. I appreciate it, buddy. J187 said, my passion comes through my voice when I do shows for MLB. Reminds him of Adam and the NBA. Really fires him up for slates. I appreciate that. Based on how good Adam is at the NBA stuff, that's a definite compliment, man. I've been honored to take the Sunday spot writing the deep dive for NBA All Year Long. And it was cool when they asked me. I kind of consider that hallowed ground in terms of NBA DFS. So that was appreciated those guys giving me the nod and let me join the club in writing that this year. Those guys do killer work. They're probably on right now. You guys are wasting your time watching this with me. Anyway, so yeah, I really like the way that this lineup comes together with Jack Flaherty, and those are just killer bats from the Twins. They're the right bats from the Yankees. You're not using that potentially over-owned min-price Kyle Garlick there, and you're getting to the right sources of power with the Twins there. Spending all your money, that's probably going to be popular, but I don't know how popular. It's not like these were the two most popular teams on the board. It's another interesting one. I'm going to leave that one up there. Pods and the Nats, it's another Gallon lineup. Tarik Skubal, I probably would look for a 31-7. There's probably a better way to spend the pitching shares on this. And this is something I wish we could get into. San Diego lineup, don't need to take a look at that. Let it load up later on. This is one that I need to figure out a better way to make this work. I was playing with creating groups around the lower cost pitchers where, like, I would say use Tarik Skubal, use they're not springing to mind, David Peterson, use Austin Gomber, and use those guys as the key players. And then when we're getting to these guys in our crunch, give a boost to the certain players that would be key players within the top stacks. And the result was that Fantasy Cruncher just kind of stared at me like, what? And just didn't do anything because I was just asking it for way too much. I think at that point, it probably would have eventually gotten there, but just in the last 15 minutes before lock, I'm not going to have time to crunch that out. But I would like a good way, outside of doing that or outside of running individual crunches for individual pitchers. If anybody out there's got a good solution to it, I'm curious about how to run that more effectively. And I'm trying to figure out a good way because you can see, I mean, this isn't like inefficiently spending money. We're getting to a good lineup here. I don't know that there's a better way to spend this money, but I'd like to explore it and see if there are good ways to force into specific constructions. I want to spend my money efficiently when I'm going to the more discounted pitchers. When I'm getting a Jack Flaherty, if I get a Jack Flaherty at 10-2 in a lineup that happens to spend 3,300 or whatever that other one was, that's fine. Or a Zach Gallen down here with Phillies and Astros and only spending 33.7, that's fine. That's the kind of spot I don't mind leaving salary on the table. This one, I'm more inclined to just change the pitcher. Obviously, I mean, Tarik Skubal's not a spot to go to anyway today, but we did have some cheap pitching. So, like, let's say this was that Griff Canning lineup that we talked about. That would still be leaving a lot of salary on the table. Maybe there's a better way to spend that. Maybe there's a better construction you can force here. I don't know that there is. Again, this lineup comes together really well. These are all the right bats from those two teams. Just depends. So, just some of the stuff that I actually look at and probably overthink like crazy once we actually dig into Fantasy Cruncher here. This one's wacky. That's an offbeat lineup. Surprise a lot of people with that one if that one wins. Kansas City going up against Carlos Rodon. Could be frisky. Putting the right pieces together, using Rodgers, leaving a lot of money there. If you want to manipulate it around, get to a different pitcher, you probably can. You can use any pitcher you want actually with that. Kind of like this one. If you wanted to take out shares against Gallen with those Mets, that's not the worst construction in the world. Just taking a casual tour through. Anybody hanging out at this point, I imagine, after an hour is probably just in it to take a look at these lineups with me and not really sweating getting out of here. This one's interesting over here. Again, like I said, I don't love my Gomber projection. For whatever reason, my model's giving him way too many strikeouts. St. Louis was a good spot the other day for Zach Wheeler, who is like a more advanced, more reliable, more trusted version of what Gomber is supposed to do. I just don't think that that's going to translate to Gomber being successful here. So I don't really trust it. I might have more shares than the average person, but I don't really recommend it. But he does allow you to put together whatever lineups you want. I will give him that credit. Do not like this one at all. See, this is where we're spending money. This is just a terrible lineup. It only projects for 135, but that's like useless. Another way to control that might be just by putting a min projection cap on it. Right? Like, there's just not much use in... Could that lineup win? Sure. It could. It's baseball. Gomber could have a nice start. The other, the Blake Snells and everybody of the world could get lit up. And Baltimore and Texas could certainly go off. There's no universe in which you can say this lineup cannot win a baseball tournament. It's not like basketball, like we talk about a lot. But these are not our most likely stacks to come through. This is not our most likely pitcher to come through. We're only spending 29.7 and we're going with a lineup that's projecting like 30 points less than that lineup that we liked off the top. I think that's a lineup that I want to try and start using Fantasy Cruncher to not hit these lineups in these constructions and waste bullets in our 500 lineup chamber. That's what I've been taking over to the sorting process lately, is 500. Rogers with... Ooh, this one's interesting. Rogers with those Mariners again, with some Braves. I feel like we've gotten Rogers in the Mariners several times, which is something, again, I mentioned it the last time around, and it's something I do like to look out for, is just how many times are the same teams coming up with specific pitchers, right? Like we got Mariners here, we got Rogers Mariners there, we got it down there, we got it in that top lineup. I feel like he was coming in with the Braves as well a few times, right? So we got Braves and Yankees over there. It makes sense that we're getting to some of those teams in those combinations. They're our highest projected ones. But you just want to watch that so that like all your Rogers shares aren't also riding on the Mariners. All your Mariners shares aren't also riding on Rogers. Same thing with the Braves, the Yankees, etc., etc. So just make sure that you're getting diversified shares of not only the players as individuals, but the combinations of the players and the stacks with one another as you really get deep into it. And that's where just jumping over to the team stacks breakdown, getting into the combos really helps out. You guys saw I built that into my spreadsheet so I can kind of manipulate this within my sorting process now, which is pretty helpful. I really like it. Snell, if you're going to Snell, that you can do a lot worse than this. Might be one that like a lot of people don't get to because it leaves 1,000 on the table and it leaves some of the more popular jump out at you Twins bats off the table. But it's kind of a sneaky wraparound up back to the top with Donaldson. Sano, obviously a power bat, so like we'd be looking for Miguel Sano to clear the bases of everybody else, or maybe Miguel Sano doubles in a few runs, he's on base, Max Kepler homers, clears the bases. Then we get Andrelton Simmons, who I mentioned supremely good at not striking out, could turn the lineup over nicely, be on base for Josh Donaldson when it wraps around. You can see the story of how that lineup can come through, and then you get to all the right bats 1 through 4 from the Braves with Blake Snell up top. I do not hate that lineup. That's a good way, if you're going to Blake Snell, to get to Blake Snell with 2 popular stacks, but put it together in an interesting, unique way with the Twin side of it and not spending all our money. That's another one I'm going to hang on to, actually. I kind of like that one. I fall in love so easily, as the Bouncing Soul said, as I'm looking at these lineups. They didn't say the lineups part. 34-8 for a Jack Flaherty Dodgers Astros stack. That's kind of slick. I don't hate that. Depends on what the Dodgers confirm in that lineup, but I don't hate that lineup. Getting to the bottom of what we've been able to crunch out, getting to the top of the hour, past the top of the hour, 6:02. Going to eventually have to actually start crunching lineups if we want to enter this contest. I hope there's actually still entries. I don't think I put a placeholder in. Should probably do that. That one's all right if you're going to Rich Hill. We can sort off a Rich Hill, though, and get somebody better, and then I like this lineup probably better. Again, pending what the Dodgers actually do, but getting to the Renfroe Dahlbeck bottom half, Verdugo Martinez up top, you could swap out for David Peterson. You could swap out for a Plesac if you wanted to, or Charlie Morton if you wanted to. That one's not uninteresting. DeSclafani, super interesting. I'm really curious to see what he does today. I'll buy into the turnaround if he goes out and has a nice start against the Pods. Anything else in here? I think that's probably all we're really going to extract from sitting here talking about lineups. I could just sit here and do this through the rest of actually building. Seems like every game is worth a stack in the quarters. Yeah, I agree. Max Video. Every game is worth a stack in most baseball slates, right? I'm always trying to get to a pretty wide swath of the field, capture as many different possible outcomes as I can, while building together in a diversified, smart way of putting things together between the pitchers, between which stacks, which combinations of those guys we're getting to, while looking at leverage, ownership against the field, all these different things that we care about. I think we hit most of the questions everybody asked, so is that enough? Let's see, where are we in Top Shot? 84,000 left. All right. Can you imagine actually standing on a line with 84,000 people in it, particularly to get an imaginary product at the end of it? But we do it. It's fun. All right. I think I'm going to get out of here, guys. Start building actual lineups. This has been fun. Appreciate everybody hanging out. We had some good questions in the chat. Good luck out there. Catch the other shows. Basketball show was brought to you by Yahoo today. This show was not, but I'm going to piggyback on that, like I said. Catch you around, everybody. Good luck in your contest. Send them to the Awesemo Hall of Fame. Awesemo HOF if you win something tonight. See ya.